All right, it is 7 p.m., so we are going to get started. So welcome everybody to Digital Navigation and Trip Planning. Just want to make you aware of some extra resources. For the week 3 exercises and video solutions walkthrough is posted in the Google Classroom, and hopefully you found the week 4 exercises. There's some exercise files that you'll want to have downloaded for tonight. And there's also a video to help you get those exercises downloaded, as well as some of the other tools. If you're not interested in the 3D part that we talk about toward the end of the lecture, feel free to just kick back and relax. But we are going to go through those. So all that stuff's in the Google Classrooms. And yeah, so an update on our kind of double match fundraiser. We had 625 new donations this week. And big shout out to all of our new donors for the week. So Angela, Cindy, Donna, Ellen, Jerry, Judy, Scott, Shuko, Stacy, Katie, and Jim. Thank you all very much for your donations. So that brings us up to interesting. I don't know why it still says 1060. It's like 1685. So you're getting close to maxing out the $2,000 match there. If you'd like to donate, go to mountaineers.org/donate. And when you do your donation, just mention my name in there's like a notes field, mention it there so that Amber knows that it's associated with this class, and then she can send me the updated numbers. So yeah, hopefully you're all getting a lot out of this course. I know I am. I'm learning new things left and right about all kinds of stuff. So it's good stuff. All right, we're going to talk tonight about off-trail route planning. And the goal is to research route info or beta, and then we're going to use Caltopo to construct our off-trail travel plans. And then we'll look at our terrain using satellite maps and also 3D models like Google Earth and a program called, or a website called FatMap. And we'll look at maps and see how those can communicate information about our plan. So what do we mean by off-trail activities? Well, lots of stuff, all the fun stuff, I guess. Off-trail, just hiking or bushwhacking, scrambling, which is kind of my sweet spot, snowshoeing, which probably should be my sweet spot since I'm the snowshoeing chair, but scrambling is really my sweet spot. Skiing, glacier travel, rock climbing, all of those things involve off-trail travel. And so for tonight, we're actually going to use a glacier travel trip as our example, but don't get hung up on that if you don't do glacier climbs, because the same techniques would apply to any kind of off-trail stuff. So the general process for planning our route is, the first thing we want to do is consult various, essentially, narratives, trip reports, that kind of stuff. And those can be digital trip reports from things like Summit Post or WTA or Peak Bagger, or they could be print sources like guidebooks and that sort of thing. So gathering notes and information about the trip. And then we're going to try and find several representative GPS tracks. And we'll talk a little bit about the kinds of criteria. And that reminds me, there's a handout in the week 4 resources on kind of guidelines for different types of trips that you might want to refer to. But we'll cover it here in class. And then we want to analyze our terrain. We're going to use Caltopo. You could use Gaia. It's totally fine if you want to do this stuff in Gaia. I just use Caltopo, and once we do the exercises, hopefully it'll make sense why I do things in Caltopo. But in theory, you could do this stuff in Gaia if you wanted to. And then we'll examine our route info in Google Earth Pro so that we can review historical satellite information, as well as examining our route in FatMap to look at kind of just the overall kind of the virtual tour of our trip plan, if you will. Those last 2 things are not necessarily crucial, but they can be helpful. And so we're going to go through them. One of the things we're not going to talk about is it is possible to link your Caltopo with Google Earth so that as you update things in Caltopo, it will update in Google Earth. I will have essentially like a little bonus video showing you how to do that, but we're just not going to cover it in class. All right, so if you recall from maybe, yeah, it was last time. We talked about two different kinds of route information, curated route info as well as historical route info. And typically you're not going to have curated route info for off-trail trips. You may have something for the approach. If there's on-trail sections that are of the approach, you might have that. But typically when there's curated route info for off-trail trips, it's more just kind of a guideline. So if you think of like the DC route on Mount Rainier, certainly appears as a route on a whole lot of maps, but you would never just follow that line, because the actual route you would take is going to depend entirely on what's going on with the glacier. So at best, they give kind of a general indication of the route. So and then, but sometimes, so the only case where I can think of something that would really be curated that applies to off trail would be for climbing routes. So some of the guidebooks, I don't know of many digital sources of this. Sometimes Summit Post will have, screen captures or scans from books, but a lot of guidebooks will have like topo maps of, and it's a different topo than what you're thinking with like a regular map, but they'll have diagrams essentially of the route. And so that would be curated. But that's really the only case I can think of with good curated information on off-trail stuff. So we're basically going to be relying on historical information. And one really good place to get historical information is other leaders. Either that you know personally, preferably that you know personally, because then you trust the quality of their tracks and you can trust their beta. Also social media groups, you can get tracks off peakbagger.com, as well as the Gaia GPS public tracks overlay. And we're going to walk through grabbing tracks off of Peakbagger and Gaia GPS tonight. So when choosing tracks, a big red warning that GPS tracks simply show the way that somebody went sometime that was successful. There's often a lot of missing information, a lot of important information that would determine how relevant that particular GPS track is to you. What kind of gear did they need? What were the snow and the weather conditions? What was the avalanche forecast? And would that person who did that route even recommend this? Because I know I have a track for, I think it's Hemlock Peak in over on I-90. That's probably on Peakbagger because it was the first time I went to that peak. And I would tell you, never, don't use that track, please, because it took us over the tops of these little trees, and it was like I would never go that way again. But it was our track, and so that's why it's best if you know the person who's supplying the track, because they can tell you, yeah, this route worked really well for us, or parts of this track worked really well for us, but avoid this section or that kind of thing. So you always have to take just pure GPX tracks with a grain of salt.
So Travis, if it's something you wouldn't recommend, why do you post it then?
So I post my tracks to Peakbagger to make sure that they, as the record that I did it. So that's why. Not necessarily as a trip report. One of the things you could also do if you wanted to is you could go into something like Caltobo and you could clean it up or something like that. But yeah, I don't know many people that do that. But yeah, to answer your question, it's posted there basically as the record to make sure that it matches what Peakbagger says was the true summit. Because there are times that I thought I've reached the summit and then I realized I didn't. So, all right. So in general, when you're choosing tracks, you would ideally like to match the snow cover. And that's going to be difficult to do oftentimes because even, from year to year and season to season, the snow pack might change in a similar pattern, but it's not going to be the same in April of this year as it was in April of last year and so forth. So where it's at in its cycle will be different. So if you can't match the snow cover, which is really hard to do, then try and match the season, which is easier to do. And then kind of the golden rule is to favor recent over older. But to kind of give a contextual example of just applying those kind of rules, let's say you had the most recent track available was from winter time and you're planning a summer trip, but there was a track from a year prior in the summer, then you would want to use the track from the previous summer, not the track from winter. Of course, if you know someone who just did the thing a week ago, well, you're going to be as close to matching the snow cover as you're ever going to be. You're going to match the season, and it's going to be recent. So that's still kind of the gold standard. But in a lot of cases, even a week is too old to really be terribly reliable. But we can account for the unreliability on things like glaciers. So glaciers conditions are constantly changing, and sometimes they change very rapidly. And just GPS error alone, which best case scenario on an iPhone is plus or minus 16 feet, could drop you into a crevasse. So bottom line is, if you're dealing with glaciers, you don't rely on a GPS track. But you can certainly use GPS tracks to see generally where people go, and we'll see that in the example today. Yeah. And Sarah mentions there's also areas where the trail's been altered due to fire or other conditions. So, yep, that is absolutely true. Avalanche terrain. Well, avalanche triggers change over time. So wherever the trigger was yesterday is not going to be where the trigger is today. So even if you have a track that your best friend went out yesterday and it was a great day, you can't just follow that GPX track because the avalanche forecast is going to could be entirely different on your day than it was on their day. So again, you can't rely on GPS tracks. You have to possess the necessary field skills to be able to travel in that terrain. And then when it comes to rock climbs, this is showing the tooth in FatMap, a GPX track from the tooth. Hopefully this says all you need to know, but GPS inaccuracy in all dimensions makes GPS inadequate for identifying really any locations on a rock climb other than it can get you to the base. But it's also because when you're in a rock climb, you're going very slowly. And so your track will just accumulate all kinds of noise, making it useless. And then if you figure in signal reflections and all this kind of stuff, yeah, not helpful, but it can get you to the base of the route. So again, don't use GPS for technical climbing routes. But if you've got climbing topos from guidebooks or whatever, yes, good stuff to have. So our scenario for tonight is going to be the same scenario throughout to hopefully kind of bring all this together. Is going to be a glacier climb of Sahalee Peak via the Quien Sabe Glacier, which is a trip I would like to do this year. And I know some of the folks in this class have done it. And that's going to be our first exercise. Basically is kind of a warm-up. All right. So this is why this is a screenshot of the map, but this is why I like using CalTopo, and this is why I use CalTopo for most of my trip planning, even though I think Gaia is better in a lot of ways. One, I have control over the line styles. So you can see here for the on-trail portions, I did those in a solid red line. And then for all of the historical off-trail sections, I just did dashed lines with different colors so that I could identify the different historical tracks. And then this jagged blue line, which says no rope up, no later than, I could do that in a different style. And in Gaia, you can only do lines in different colors, but they're always the same style. I also have fine control over which labels are displayed. So you'll notice that I've got the label printed for the waypoints, but I don't have any labels printed for the historical tracks, but I do have the label printed for this rope up no later than line. So in CalTopo, I have finer control over what is displayed and how it's displayed. And then, of course, as I've said probably 1,000 times, I can directly control the scale of the map in Caltopo, and I can't do that in Gaia. That's not a crucial thing, but it's a thing I like. So this background is the Gaia, or I'm sorry, the map builder topo, the default. But I wouldn't, so this is one thing that I don't like about Caltopo is I would not have chosen this as the base layer because it's got lots of color and lots of shading. So if I wanted to print this, I would take it to somewhere like Kinko's. But the problem was the Forest Service map doesn't cover the top section of this. And so I thought, if I had done this in Gaia, there's a lot more options that don't have shading. So in that sense, Gaia would be better. But all right, so we are going to talk about importing historical tracks. And because Remy had the question of, did I draw the historical? No, I did not draw the historical. And I'll show you exactly what I did do, because then you're going to get a chance to do it. So I'm going to cover 2 ways to do it. And in the exercise, you're going to choose one, whichever one you prefer. So we're going to show how to get tracks from peakbagger.com and how to get tracks from Gaia. And so whichever one you prefer, go for it. So first I'm going to do Peakbagger. So I'm going to go in, I have so many things open. All right, so I go into Peakbagger, peakbagger.com. It is a 90s looking website. It is not the most usable thing in the world, but it is useful. So I'm going to go up here to the top right corner of the screen. It has this very obnoxious banner that makes it hard to read things, but I'm just going to type in Sahalee Peak. And that brings up this one. And there's only one match, and it's the one we want. So I'm going to click on that. And then it brings up a whole host of information. And what we're looking for here is we're going to scroll down to ascent info and then show all viewable ascents and attempts. And it says there's a total of 531. So we're going to click on that because we want to see all the ascents. Because what we're looking for are the ascents that have GPS tracks. Now, as it slowly loads. So sometimes, in this case, it's already showing, I think, everything. No, it's not. So by default, it shows the most current year. And so what we want to do is go over here to where it says all and click on that. That'll give us all of the ascents of this peak. And it takes a little while. Again, 90s website. And then we want to click, there's these column headers. We want to click where it says GPS because we want to see just the ones that have GPS tracks. So when we click that, it's going to sort them, and it's going to sort them so that all the ones with GPS tracks float to the top, which is what we want. And one of the things you'll notice here is, one, sometimes it'll list the route. So we are specifically looking for the Quien Sabe Glacier. So any of these first 6 are probably ones I already have in my track, but would be something to look for. If they don't say anything, you just have to look and see if it fits. But the ones that say like Cascade Pass, that's probably not going to be, or Sahalee Arm aren't probably not going to be applicable. But what you can see here, 500 some odd ascents, and I don't know, what, less than 20 with a GPS track. The upside is most of the ones with a GPS track have a date. And just being able to look at a table with dates is really nice, because if you're trying to look for a certain season, it's really nice to be able to just see the date. So I am going to just pick one. I'm going to pick this one. And it's important to click on the date. If you click on the name of the person, it's going to take you to like their profile. You need to click on the date to actually get to the information. And this brings up their trip report. And the trip reports tend to be just this descriptive or less descriptive. it's pretty rare that you will actually get a descriptive trip report out of PeakBagger generally. But then we have their route. And actually this route is a little more ambitious than I'm looking for. So this would not be a good one. But that's, you can preview what the route looks like. And if you want to download it, underneath the map, there's an option to download this GPS track as a GPX file. In this case, I don't actually want this one. So of course I picked the one. There's a question, what does the parentheses mean? I'm not sure, but I will find out. But let's look at one. Oh, it means it was an attempt. So they didn't reach the summit. And if it has like an A, it means it was in a series of, they did several peaks in that time. So I'll just pick this one, even though it's probably already in my file. Okay, I don't like that one. Sure, this works. All right, and again, this I know is in my historical, but it'll work for the example. Very descriptive trip reports. So I just find the ones I want. I can look at them and that sort of thing, and see if they seem like they'd fit. I would want to look at things like the date and make sure it aligns with what I'm looking for. But just as an example, I'm going to download this GPS track as a GPX file. So it is saved, in my case, it's saved in my downloads folder. I'll show you how we import it into Caltopo. I'll do that in a minute, but now I'm going to go over to Gaia. And here on Gaia, I've already zoomed over to that area, and I've already turned on the public tracks overlay so that I get the green lines. So now I can just, I can see a whole bunch of different options. And I can just, if I see one that's interesting, I can just click it. And that will bring up the profile. And then it kind of highlights the whole thing. So it stops being a simplified version and shows the actual thing. And now if I actually want to get to it, I have to click on the name to get to the data. So it took that many clicks to see that this was July 13th of 2019. So it's a lot harder. You can't filter public tracks by date. You have to go in and individually click them and then click into the details to see the date. So that's kind of annoying, quite frankly. One of the nice things though is when you click into it, when it'll eventually load the route, but you get the speed profile, and that is not something you will get if you're opening a track in PeakBagger. You can usually get that information. What you do is you download it from PeakBagger and import it into Gaia, and then you will be able to see this information, but in Gaia you can see it directly. So I would love to say one is clearly superior to the other, but it's really not. And then it has information on how long the trip took, how long they were stopped, etc. And all of this is very useful information as you're planning your trip, even though that person's trip is not going to be the same as yours, and so the times won't be exact, but it is helpful information to have. So I don't know why this map isn't loading, but all it would do is show the track. But if I decide, yes, this is what I want, then I go up here to data and I download it as GPX. Don't download it as any of the others. Download it as GPX. And there we go, that's the Holly Mountain GPX. And that's the one I'm going to import into Gaia because I know the other one I downloaded from PeakBagger is already imported into Gaia. So I'm going to hop over, into Caltopo. I'm going to hop over to Caltopo and import this new track. All right. So you have your GPX file, whether you got it from PeakBagger or Gaia or a friend or wherever you got it from. And now I want to import it. So this is what I do, and this is how I made this map. So you'll note I only have the historical portion for the off trail. Every single one of these has historical information all the way to the trailhead and back. That's not useful to me and just adds noise, so I get rid of it. and I'll show you the process I go through, and you'll get a chance to practice this. So in Gaia, I'm going to go up here to import, and I'm going to choose a file. And I'm going to choose, that's the Holly Mountain GPX. And this is what it wants to import, and that's what I want. And now I've got my new red line. There is something wonky going on here, but that's fine. So the first thing I'm going to do is hide all of these other historical tracks. So I'm just going to turn them off individually. If I turn off historic entirely, then when I move this new track into the historic folder, it will stop appearing, and I don't want that. And I'm going to hide also my overall route and my in and out. So I basically just see the historical, and then I've got my blue line. The first thing I like to do is get rid of all this jitter in the lines, because that's not really helpful to me, although sometimes it can be a little helpful to see they clearly stopped here because it's just a tangled mess, and they stopped here. And sometimes that information is interesting. But typically what I like to do is I will click on the route, and I will click here where it says resample. And what this is going to do, and it says it's going to discard time in elevation data, and that's fine because Caltopo doesn't show any of that anyways. So I'm going to say yes. And what this will do is essentially smooth out this line. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to resample based on distance, which is the default, and I'm going to create a point every, you can play around with this, but I like to do every 200 feet. The larger this number, the more smoothed it's going to be. So if you look at this line, when I hit OK, it's going to smooth out. So it smooths the line out a little bit, because when it's this nice lightning bolt looking thing, it implies there's so much precision, but a lot of that jaggedness is really just error in the GPS anyways. So that's the first thing I like to do, is trim, or is smooth out the line. The next thing I want to do is I don't need all this stuff that's on the trail, because it's on trail. And I don't know what's going on with this straight line. It looks like maybe they stopped recording. So I'm going to trim away the sections that are not useful to me. So I'm going to click wherever I want to trim. So I want to trim right here at this corner, and I'm going to tell it to split and say OK. And now I've got one line and two lines. So I'm going to take that section that was on trail, and I'm just going to delete it. And then I'm going to go over here, and I plan to, once you get to the Sahalee Glacier Camp, you're back to on trail. So I'm going to trim there as well and split. OK. Pick the on trail section and get rid of it. So now I have just the off trail portion of this historical track. And now what I'm going to do, and I like to do this to keep it organized, I create a folder called historic. And you can create a folder by just going to add new object, folder. By default, you'll have a markers folder and a lines and polygons folder. So if you want to create other ones, you do it as add new object. So I'm going to click on this section and click edit. And now I don't want it to say Sahalee Mountain. I'm going to follow my pattern and say historic 6. And I'm going to move the folder to historic. And I'm going to change the color. I don't have a lot of options because I have a lot of historical tracks. So I'm just going to make it like a bluish. Sure. And I'm going to make the style a dashed line. I like the dashed line for my personal trips. Dashed line means to me off trail. But it's whatever convention you want to follow. And then I'll hit OK. And now you can see that it moved that historic track into the historic folder. And I can turn these back on now. And I'll turn the hike in and out. So you can see there's kind of like two paths here. Some people take this lower path, which is a little more direct, and others tend to go a lot more north. And so this blue one is more north than this purple and orange, but it kind of shows me that there's two general ways that people go, but people seem to prefer going further north. which is all useful to me because you don't really know what the conditions are going to be till you're there. And so being able to see options can be helpful. Whereas if I turned on overall route, to me, that is like, oh, that's a line that you're going to follow. But in the reality is, if you're on a glacier, you're not just going to arbitrarily follow a line. So I don't like putting a solid line that looks like a trail on something that's off trail. So for myself personally, I do have this line because it's nice if I want to be able to just click on it and see what that it's 10 miles overall, and I want to see the terrain statistics for the whole trip. And that's why I have it. But that's also why I turn it off when I print it, because it serves a specific purpose, but not really for navigation. So there's a question about the blue line. So I have it as a rope up no later than, and I didn't set it based on, you notice it doesn't really follow what the topo map says is the glacier edge. So what I did here is, right now I have it in TF Outdoors. You could also have it in Map Builder Topo. And there it really doesn't follow what Map Builder says is the glacier line. What I used is I went in here to the satellite layer. You should if you're doing off-trail stuff, you should always turn on the satellite layer. And I set it based on this, because I don't know what the snow cover is going to look like. The snow could be down, way down this slope. And if the snow starts at the Boston Basin Camp, I don't need to be roped up for this entire time, because that would make things a lot slower. So it's handy to know, and I basically set this as a tripwire to say, if I haven't roped up already, by the time I cross this line, I'm definitely going to rope up, because I can see from the satellite imagery that I looked at beforehand that that's kind of where the edge of the glacier is. And I might, if I wanted to be even more conservative, push that a little further west. All right. Let's see. Another thing I would look at, not necessarily with the satellite image on, is to maybe switch back to TF Outdoors is pretty good. I'm going to turn on the slope angle shading. And we'll learn about like custom slope angle shaders next week, but we're just talking about the basic slope angle shading. If you've ever heard anything about CalTopo, I'm sure you've heard about slope angle shading. And I want to look at these routes relative to the slope angle shading. And I can see that when I first look at this, I think, oh, these ones that are going way north, there's a lot of really steep slopes up there. But then when I look at the satellite image, I can kind of see, well, that's because they're going to the edge of the glacier and waiting to get on the glacier. They're not going on these slopes at all. So I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But then if I look at the ones that here that more directly just march up the glacier to the south, they get to like this, I don't know, it looks to me like a toilet bowl of doom. I wouldn't want to go on that. That's a lot of red and purple, and I definitely don't want to go anywhere near purple. So that's not something I would really want to do, which is why my route that I was planning is going to probably follow the people that went more north, because this is much gentler. I mean, it's not even yellow, so it's less than, I think yellow is 27, so it's less than, it's like 25 degrees or less. So much gentler by going north and going across. But you could also use this if you're planning a route to maybe tweak it a bit. Now, one thing you have to be careful of is that the resolution of this slope angle shading is imperfect, and we'll talk about that in a lot more depth next week. So necessarily trying to thread the needle between red sections isn't necessarily going to be successful. But yeah, another thing that's kind of interesting by looking at these is, I'm going to turn off the slope angle shader, is there's this weird gap. There's like lines going here and there's lines going around this part, but this part from the lines looks fine. Like, why not? Well, if you go and you look at the satellite, you at least get a hint of why. There's really big crevasses right here. Now this is one satellite image, and we're going to look at this more when we look at the historical imagery. And one of the things we can look at is, do these two big crevasses historically appear here? Sometimes they will, and sometimes they won't. So that's something we can examine when we look at this in Google Google Earth. All right. So I think it is about, so there's really quickly, there's a question. When you resample, does the distance lessen because you've eliminated many shorter segments? The distance would lessen just because it's not as wiggly. But I mean, it might be a little more accurate because it is taking out that noise. So it's like taking a wavy string and pulling it taut. Well, I guess it's not really like that, but yes, the answer to your question is it probably would affect the distance a little bit, but there's probably some inaccuracy in that original distance anyways, just due to GPS error. So, all right, now it is time for me to stop talking and you all to practice. So exercise 2, I'm going to set the timer for 5 minutes. You're going to go in. But again, you'll have opportunity to practice this and look for the solution file if you were stuck on anything. All right, so comparison between Gaia and PeakBagger. I will have this available in the slides. I'm not going to read it all out. Essentially, it's what I told you. It's not, it isn't decisive. Each one has pros and cons. I will say, since Gaia changed its public trip overlay and made it the green lines, it seems like a lot of tracks that used to show up no longer do. And that makes it a little less useful, but you could try both. I actually use PeakBagger more often, even though I rag on it for looking like a 90s website. So, all right, so we talked about all these things. The one thing I didn't talk about is the weekly high-res layer in CalTopo. And the reason I didn't talk about it is because CalTopo decided to hide that layer behind a $50 a year paywall. And I personally didn't find that that particular feature is worth $50 a year, considering Gaia, all of Gaia is like $40 a year. But what it did, and I can show you with the low res version, so you get an idea. If I zoom out, I gotta zoom out a lot. So I go in here and I can turn on the daily low res layer, and then you can see the weekly high res, but it's pro only, and pro is $50 a year. So if I turn on the daily low res, this is what you get, and this is why, and this is what you'd get in the weekly high res too. You get a lot of clouds, but when you have it set, you can change it. For this one, it's by day, but the high res was by week. But I could say, okay, so a week ago. Okay, 2 weeks ago. I know at some point I found one that didn't have clouds every day. Okay, these aren't clouds. This is now snow. So the idea is that imagine if you could actually zoom to the level where you could actually see the mountain. The low res is basically pretty useless, but the high res actually wasn't useless. But it wasn't really what I'd call high resolution. It was like medium resolution at best, but it would let you see a lot more zoomed in to where you could actually see things, although it was a bit fuzzy. But the idea was you could actually see the most recent snowpack rather than having to read trip reports or guessing or that kind of thing. You could actually see the snow level. The problem was every time, well, not every time, maybe 9 times out of 10 that you'd say most recent or this week, you're going to get a bunch of clouds. And so you have to go back 2 or 3 weeks to see what the snow was like then. If you happen to have CalTopo, the pro version, just because you have it, I would say use that layer. I would also say don't get the pro version of CalTopo just to have access to that layer. So that's what I'll say on that. All right, so now we'll get into examining routes in 3D, and this is probably going to take us past 8. So if you don't care about looking at things in 3D, don't worry about it. It's not crucial to any trip plan, but it is a way of looking at things with a different perspective. So, and it can be a little unwieldy to control. So that word of warning there. All right. Is it just a gimmick? It can be, but it gives you a better feel of the terrain. It can give you a nice visual overview of the trip, particularly if you are the trip leader and you want to give a kind of an overview to your participants. It can be really helpful for that. And you can use it to kind of anticipate problems and actually get things like virtual beta almost. All right. So I'm going to talk about 2 tools. I don't like talking about 2 tools. I would love to talk about 1 tool. But I'm going to talk about Google Earth Pro and FatMap. And the reason is each one has pros and cons. Google Earth Pro has vastly superior satellite imagery. Google has the most amazing satellites. They're fantastic. And it has historical satellite imagery. And that is the most useful thing in my view. It can link directly with your CalTopo route. So as you're drawing things in CalTopo, it can update in Google Earth. I think of it mostly as a gimmick. I've never actually used it for any practical purpose, and that's why I'm not going to cover it tonight. But I will have a video where it will show you how to do that if you want to. The other nice thing is that Google Earth Pro displays waypoints, and we'll see that when we do the exercise. The big downside, and it's a big downside, is that Google Earth Pro has absolutely horrible 3D topography. And this is an example. This is South Early Winter Spire as seen in Google Earth Pro on the left and FatMap on the right. You can see that Google Earth is really nice high resolution, but it looks like the mountain is a football field, which is unfortunate. So, and I just checked this. The easiest thing to do is look at Mount Si on Google Earth Pro, and you'll be like, oh, I get it. On the other hand, FatMap has much better 3D topography. It also displays common trails and routes, which is kind of nice. It has CalTopo-like views like slope angle shaders and gradient shaders and that kind of stuff. It also has a bunch of stuff that's locked behind a paywall, but those things aren't super crucial. Unfortunately, the satellite image quality is not as good, and it doesn't let you choose historical imagery. Although in certain cases you can switch between summer and winter, but pretty much only if you're near a ski area. And it doesn't import waypoints. So this is an example of that weird patchy. These are 2 different satellite images from 2 different times, and you don't really get to control what's displayed. So, but yeah. So let me close CalTopo and close PeakBagger and close Gaia and close all this stuff. So I'm going to open it up in FatMap first. Actually, is that the first exercise? Yes. So I'm here in FatMap. You have to be logged in with a free account, which the exercise pre-work showed you how to do that if you haven't done it already. If you don't want to do this, that's fine too. So I want to see my route in 3D. So I'm going to go over here to the very far left where it says little person, and it says my stuff. And I'm going to create some my stuff. I'm going to create a new adventure. I'm going to choose a type, and this will be mountaineering. And then I'm going to drag and drop my GPX file. So I'm going to upload that Sahaly GPX. So that's in the exercise file. So Sahaly GPX from the exercise files, and it will create my adventure. And now I can zoom in, pan, look at things. I lose all my formatting, but you can see this is my glacier edge. And you can see why I have that, because there's a snow like very far down, and I wouldn't necessarily want to rope up until I'm actually near the glacier, just because of how much it slows me down. You can see that the peaks look like the peaks like you would expect them to. They look like mountain peaks, and the saddle looks like a saddle, and that's all. You're wondering why would you say something like that? You'll see why when we open it in Google Earth. But so the nice thing here, I can do a flyover Actually, I need to save it. So I can look at the route, and then I'm going to go up to the top right where it says save and continue. And all I have to do is give it a name. So I'm going to just call it the Sahalee demo. There's other stuff you can put in there, but I'm not going to. You don't need to do this. And then I'm just going to say save privately. Now I get my little airplane, which is the fly through. And so I can click on that and it'll just kind of walk me through the route. And some other things I can do while it's doing that fly through. I have layers down here in the bottom right, and it's kind of the little stacked squares. So I can open those up. Maybe there'll be a difference between summer and winter, unless you're near a ski area. So if you're at Alpental, there is, but here there clearly isn't. And that's just because they don't yet have a winter satellite layer, because I actually interviewed the co-founder of this and they said it's hard to get winter satellite imagery. Most of these layers are behind a paywall, but the ones that aren't are here at the very bottom, the terrain layers, and I can turn on things. The two that I find useful is the gradient and then the avalanche. I think the avalanche is a misnomer, definitely, but I like it because it's a little more clear cut. Gradient means everything looks, it's all like blends together, which I don't find works for my eye. And the avalanche layer is a little more distinct. So I can go in here and look at these areas of the route and say, well, what do I think about that? And so it's kind of like a 3D CalTopo, although it has a lot less features. You can also do, there's other ones. There's aspect, which I don't care for, and then elevation, and I've not really found a great use for elevation. So the ones I use here are typically gradient and avalanche, and then just kind of getting a sense for the topography and maybe doing a fly through. That would mostly be for participants, but in reality, if I was doing this for participants, I wouldn't have all these historical tracks. This is a case where I would use my one route, but yeah. All right. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to practice that. Well, I guess I'm just going to go into Google Earth Pro. All right. So there was a question earlier. I think it was Donna. So I'm in Google Earth Pro. So like I said in the pre-work file, this does not work in Google Earth if you're using the web version or if you're using the mobile version. You need to be using the desktop version Google Earth Pro. And even though it's called Pro, it's 100% free. But it works on Mac or Windows, maybe Linux, I don't know. So I'm going to go into Google Earth Pro. I'm going to go to Open. And I'm going to open that Sahalee KML file. So I just have to hit Open. There's no importing, and just open it. And when I open it, it is going to zoom me over there in nice dramatic fashion. And you can see all of my waypoints, and you can see some of the styling was preserved on my lines, which is great. And you can see that you can already see that the satellite imagery is much better. However, to zoom on and pan on Google Earth is different. I have to use my middle mouse button, like click my mouse wheel, whereas in FatMap, it's the right mouse button. They're just different. So you play around with them and you'll get a feel for it. So some of the things here I want to do in Google Earth, the very first thing I want to do is show you the unfortunate downside of Google Earth. Let's look up just at the ridge, and you can see Boston Peak has been annihilated, and Sahalee Peak is also been annihilated, and for some reason the top of the col is over the edge. So again, if you don't look at the tops of anything and expect it to be in any way accurate, because it won't be. But you can look at it from a top-down view, basically 2 dimensions, and it's great. So one of the questions we had earlier was about these 2 crevasses here. Is this a fluke that they're always going around them? Or are these crevasses that are usually present? And so to answer that question, we are going to look at the historical imagery. We also wanted to look at our rope up no later than, because you can see we drew it based on the latest satellite imagery, which if you see at the bottom, it says was 2016, August of 2016. To see where the edge of the glacier is, we want to make sure, we want to see if that makes sense. So I'm going to go up here to the toolbar. There's like a little clock with a green arrow on it. And if you hover over it, it says show historical imagery. And I'm going to turn that on. And that brings up this timeline. And I can click, there's a forward and a back button. It already starts at the end. So really at the beginning, all you can do is click back. But as I click back, it's going to update the satellite imagery. So now this is from July of 2013. And you can see that the snow goes all the way down to Boston Basin Camp in July of 2013. But you can also see that, yeah, that crevasse is still there. And you can go back even more. And you can see this is September of 2011. Still a lot of snow. Hints of those crevasses, but they're largely covered up. And you can do this to kind of get a sense for where, and that's not just for glacier travel, you can do this for a lot of things, to see in a particular area, what does the snow cover look like? You don't necessarily know that it's going to be there when you plan to be there, but if you see that everything's covered in snow in June and you're planning on going there in May, you can probably bet there's going to be snow. So you can use this as part of kind of your investigation, particularly when there's not a lot of recent data. It's historical, as you can see, with like things like, climate change and whatnot. Man, there was a lot of snow a long time ago, and now there's not nearly as much snow at these times of year, but you can be a little bit of a detective here. You can also see some other areas, like this crevasse here is pretty consistently present, which means, it's probably some feature of the terrain underneath that causes it to be that way. But you can look, and this goes all the way back to like 1998. So this is 2006, and we can see that, well, it looks like the glacier maybe went a little past our blue line. And then eventually all the way back to 1998, it seems to have gone even further. So you can get a sense for what's happening with the glaciers and so forth. And then you can even take a look. So you can take a look at the Quien Glacier, and you can take a look at the Sahalee one and see how they compare. And the Sahalee one is quite a bit tamer in terms of crevasse action. But I would encourage, I think of the two, the one that's more practically useful, in my opinion, is to open it in Google Earth Pro and look at the historical stuff. But I mean, the resolution on this, you can actually see the individual little glacier camp. Yes, thank you, Zoe. That's a great point. There's another cool feature in Google Earth Pro that if you've used Google Earth or Google Maps, is probably familiar to you. Let's go. The little street view. And you're like, well, there's no streets in the mountains. True, but watch what happens if I drag this onto the camp. It is going to put me at ground level. And so in this way, I can get a sense for what to expect from different points. I wouldn't use this on the summit because, as I said, the topography is not accurate for the summits. But for parts along your route, if you don't have beta, you can kind of create virtual beta. And then I want to exit this. And there's a way to exit. There we go. Exit ground level. So you can see your route overlaid onto the 3D imagery. So sometimes people will actually make these pictures. They'll take photos and then draw the route on there. But you can kind of do this virtually. So if I was like, okay, if I'm here and I'm going to start traversing onto the glacier, what am I going to be looking at? And so you can get a sense. So if you don't have route, picture beta, you can actually create some virtual beta if you want to. So that's kind of another neat little feature. All right, now it's time for you to play around. So go ahead and hop in. 5 minutes. So, and I will again show, I will have a quick demo video for those who are interested in linking their Caltopo to Google Earth. So you could basically have Google Earth Pro open and Caltopo open, and when you change your route in Caltopo, it will update in Google Earth. I've never found a practical use for it, but I will show you how to do it because maybe you will. And if you find a practical use for it, please teach me because I'm always happy to learn. All right. So in summary, we have screened and selected GPX files to use as a basis for our off-trail adventures. We've looked at our routes in 2D and 3D satellite imagery and other overlays to kind of evaluate our plan. And we've created some informational maps. And so you saw some of the techniques that I applied for my maps. You can do whatever works for you. I wanted to show you what works for me, and I'll show you some more stuff that works for me next week when we talk about winter. And so next time, we're going to talk about winter route planning, and that is pretty much going to be in Caltopo. We won't really go into other things. So it's going to pretty much be working with Caltopo and working with NMAC and that kind of stuff. So that brings us to the Q&A, and I've got one